after I did an investigation into the killing of 3 Palestinian teenagers, looking at the sonic profile of the gunfire, we could establish that they were not firing rubber bullets, as they claimed. They were firing live ammunition based on the sound of the bullets. And in fact, visibly, they were doing everything to show that they were firing rubber bullets, but it's the sound that gave it away. What we saw with Hind Rajab, the story that now most people know about that case, is from our work, that the tank that killed her was 13 to 20 meters away. You've got to have a long view, otherwise you'd go crazy, because if we do not have justice in this war, what will the next one look like?
Welcome to BaytCast, the podcast brought to you by Bayt.com, the Middle East #1 job site. My name is Rabea Ataya, and today I feel super privileged to be sitting here across from Lawrence Abu Hamdan. Lawrence defies titles. If you look him up on the internet, you'll see him called an artist, a filmmaker, an activist, a researcher. From what I understand, Lawrence prefers to call himself a privateer, and I hope to learn a lot more about what that means. This podcast is fundamentally about talent, and you exemplify and embody talent in so many different ways that I thought it would be an amazing opportunity for you to be here with me today. Lawrence's work has been displayed in the Guggenheim, the Tate Modern, the MoMA. He's exhibited in biennials in South Korea, Berlin, Sydney, and Venice. And his work and art revolves around solving real-world mysteries, and often tragic mysteries, including the killing of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, the bombing of Al-Ahli Hospital, where I think the numbers range from, 100 to 400 civilians were killed who were sheltering away in what was supposed to be a humanitarian zone, the regular incursion of Israeli jets over Lebanon, the brutal murder of Hind Rajab, a 5-year-old who, when she was found, over 300 bullets were found riddled in her car, and the ambulance crew that had gone to rescue her had been murdered, as well as the torture that happened in the Saydnaya prison in Syria. So Lawrence, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Rabea.
And I'd like to start off with your field of study. I saw that you studied sonic arts at Middlesex University.
Yeah.
If you can tell me a bit about what sonic arts is.
Yeah, the backstory is, just as your listeners might hear the word sonic arts and think, what the hell is that? This is what I thought as well the first time I heard those two words next to each other. I was a musician, mostly doing crazy experimental music. And at that time, I was living in the north of England. And to study in a university, you would get a student loan, and it would cost, I think, about £1,000 a year for tuition fees. And I'm not that old. I'm 40 years old. So in my lifetime, that is radically changed. And this £1,000 a year mean you can take risks. Yeah. And that ability to take risks has now been able to shape my whole life, because what I kind of studied there doing sonic arts, which was a joint BSc and BA program. Wow. So it was a bachelor's in science and bachelor's in arts, which is again how I've continued to work and has shaped my kind of way of working since then. I could take a risk, say, sonic arts, and then you read, okay, it's about the experiments in sound, and I'll say, okay, let's do it. No, I'd never seen those two words next to each other. And
you were born in Jordan, and
I was born in Jordan. Yeah,
the culture of the region is one where most parents want their kids to end up being engineers, lawyers, or doctors.
Right.
Tell me a bit about when you went to your parents and said, I want to study sonic arts. Was that shock horror, or they were happy to take the risk with you? I'd love a bit about thinking about the support structure to do what you did.
Look, if I'm honest, there wasn't really a father in the picture at that point, which is probably a big reason why doctor, engineer, and lawyer was on the table. And my mother was a single mother working hard.
Amazing.
Didn't have the time to look at over our exams or our homework. We were just kind of left to our own devices. which was challenging, but then in the end you end up learning to make your own decisions and follow what you're interested in. And I think that was the biggest gift.
So I
Yeah.
guess part of the lack of oversight meant you could chart your own course and do what you wanted to
100%.
do. And if you look back to that time and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to get this degree, what do I do next?
Yeah,
What
wasn't there.
It
Wasn't even
there.
thinking.
Okay, you were just thinking this is going to be interesting and exciting, and they're paying me a bit of money.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I could go there, and then it was. I mean,
Yeah.
it really, truly was. But again, like it's British education, so it was kind of self-led as well.
Okay.
You keep specializing early. For people who didn't know that system, I mean, you're already just only doing 3 subjects when you're 16, 17. So you keep continually specializing. And that, I think, was also really good for my way of learning and sort of, being self-led. I think the more I could do that, the more I could kind of extend into academia and even do the PhD. Yeah.
And so when you did finish,
Mhm.
where did you go with that? So I've seen
Yeah.
your career eventually.
Yeah.
But what did you get into forensic investigations right away, or
Right. No. So I finished. I was doing, I finished. I knew a lot about acoustic phenomena and audio engineering. I knew a lot about how to experiment with that, and I was doing kind of sort of art installations in here and there, but sort of that lacked direction. And then I went on a road trip to Bolzano, Italy. And there was a biennial. It was called Manifesta Biennial. This is 2007. And that's where I saw the work the first time of Eyal Weizman. Eyal Weizman is an Israeli architect and the founder of forensic architecture. And I say, wow, what's this? And I saw he does a course, he led a course in Goldsmiths called Research Architecture. So I said, it's just like Sonic Arts.
Yeah.
What's research architecture? And again, in this kind of low risk environment, I went to do the master's, and then studying under him was where I got sort of really shaped into thinking about how all those things I'd been interested in could kind of coalesce around a kind of series of political questions. Because for him, if you told him, I'm interested in sound and space and acoustics, he'd tell you which sound, which acoustics. No? Immediately he would force precision. And then a whole series of questions as a young mind sort of start to open up and start to give focus. And
I found it very interesting when I did look up forensic architecture that it was founded by an Israeli architect, given how much of the work has been on Israeli war crimes, actually, and how much it's exposed. To what extent did that come into play? So as you were getting projects about Palestinians being shot or killed by Israeli troops, was it easy to accept that work? Was the pressure to turn away?
No, not at all, no. I mean, it's also a very different time. And so he's the author of Hollowland, right, which is this seminal book about the Israeli architecture of occupation. So his work has always been learning from the injustices of occupation and sort of thinking how to do counter mapping, how to do exercises that would sort of, lead toward liberation, I guess. And so, no, it's not there's no pressure to not take anything on because of the nationality. And the pressure has actually increased over the years. We were very free at the beginning to do whatever we wanted to and felt like we could say whatever we want. And in fact, that changed, and it's changing again, seemingly now.
It seems as the crimes get worse, the pressure to suppress them has grown. Can you give us a feel of what, and pick the investigation of choice? You've done so many investigations, but if you can share the storyline of a single investigation and what was involved, because it seems like forensic architecture it's partially sound investigation, it's partially architecture, it's partially eyewitness testimony. There seems to be a lot of parts that come together into uncovering what really happened. So I'd love a narrative and pick the narrative of choice.
So, I mean, I don't work I founded my own organization now, which is Earshot, which we can get to in a minute. But we closely collaborate with forensic architecture, and my PhD was with the founder of forensic architecture, and I did a lot of cases in collaboration with them over the years. One of the ones that I'm most known for, and my name is most associated for, is the investigation in 2016 into Saydnaya prison. And it was the first time a lot of people from outside of Syria understood what was going on in there. It was published by Amnesty International in 2016, and it had a massive geopolitical effect. At that time, it was, basically the world was ready to accept Bashar al-Assad as a lesser evil.
And when you say published by Amnesty
Yeah.
International, did they commission it?
Yes.
They did. So they would come knock on your door and say, listen, we'd like to know more about this prison.
Exactly.
Can you
So
investigate?
each case led to the next. No, so after I did an investigation into the killing of 3 Palestinian teenagers, looking at the sonic profile of the gunfire, we could establish that they were not firing rubber bullets, as they claimed. They were firing live ammunition based on the sound of the bullets. And in fact, visibly, they were doing everything to show that they were firing rubber bullets, but it's the sound that gave it away.
And I read on that
Yeah.
they first obviously denied.
Mhm.
And that was supposedly, once you did the investigation, the first case of an Israeli military official being put on trial and actually convicted
For negligence.
for negligence.
Yeah.
And then he was let off only 6 months later.
Yes. But still, it forced a process of
Reckoning.
justice and
Yeah.
a reckoning that now, I mean, I don't know what it's led to, because we see every day breaches of law by the Israeli army. But at the same time, each of for the families, that was incredibly important. Nadim Nawara and Muhammad Abu Dahir, who were the ones who were killed. And basically, yeah, they what we could show with the sound is that they were using the cover, the legality of rubber bullets to conceal and fire live ammunition. And that must have been a systemic issue, because we could see the way that the teenagers reacted. They knew the difference on the ground very quickly between live and rubber. I had to learn it. So those, I always say, the people on the ground, and we'll get to that with Saydnaya, they're the real experts. And we're the ones kind of learning and publishing this stuff based on their knowledge.
You go into a lab somewhere, shoot a rubber bullet, and then shoot a steel bullet and realize that, okay, they sound different? Or
no, I
what
mean,
is the process?
Today we don't need to do much of that, because it's all open source investigation. Half of YouTube is people firing guns, basically.
So you can actually go, interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, that was a relatively easy case if I think about it now. And what we're able to do now is so much more sophisticated than what we could do then. All I had to show then is that there was a supersonic crack. There was the sound of a crack of the bullet breaking the sound barrier.
And that rubber bullets don't do that.
Don't do that, because they travel around, I think, 170, 180 meters per second. Whereas, what makes a bullet so lethal is its speed, of course.
Yeah.
And live ammunition is traveling around 900 meters per second, which break the sound barrier. So with that crack, gave it away, basically. But what was interesting, he's filmed. It was one of the rare occasions where he's actually on camera.
The Israeli soldier
Yeah, the
shot.
Israeli soldier on the CNN camera. And what he did is he looks at the camera, he fires, he looks at the camera, and he cocks the bullet back, and
So you can even see the casing.
the casing comes out. But that's what they said. Look, he's clearly fired a rubber bullet, because when you fire rubber bullets, it's like an old musket. You insert 3 cartridges in the end of a adapter, and then you fire them. And what you're firing is blanks. So that's why the sound is so similar at the outset. It sounds like a gunshot, because you're firing a blank. All the gas that pushes it out is the blank combusting. It pushes out the rubber bullet. But then what you have to do is manually cock it so that the next thing comes out, because basically the mechanism of the gun to return the next bullet up, it doesn't function when you have something pull in the end. So he looks at the camera and he pulls back the thing to cock out actually a bullet, a real bullet, an unfired bullet. So they knew very much what they were doing, and they had the rubber bullet adapter on the end. So the optics of it were all geared around the firing of rubber bullet, but the sound is what gave them away. And this is what we've been finding in our work with Earshot, this organization I started that does audio research for human rights and environmental advocacy. We've been finding that often authorities like the Israeli government are extremely complacent when it comes to sound. And we've caught them in a couple of whoppers of lies.
Yeah, so it's basically sound is saying a story that sight doesn't show you in this case, where it looks like a rubber bullet's coming out, but if you listen to it, you realize it's not.
And from there, Amnesty understood that there was someone associated to forensic architecture and doing their research there, Goldsmiths University, who was doing sound, and they had this case come up of Saydnaya. And Saydnaya prison was experienced by sound, by its survivors, because when you were entered the prison, you were blindfolded, and then for the entirety of your sentence, you're staying mostly in one room. You don't leave. So anything, the comings and goings and what was going on outside and how the guards were moving, and all of that was to the experienced acoustically by ear witnesses, we'd call them. So what we did in 2016 with Amnesty is we set up a series of ear witness testimonies where I would play sounds, we would play tones, white noises, we would try and understand the levels, we would try and place them in the prison where they were according to other prisoners to try and cross-corroborate testimony. And we did all that by this sort of process of using sort of sound effects, tones, white noises, and a series of questions that would open up their acoustic memories.
And we're so reliant on visual memories and can describe our visual memories quite well. How easy is it to draw out audio memories, and do people even have the language to describe that memory?
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting sort of field of study, because there is so many laboratory tests about the sort of veracity of eyewitness testimony. There's only one that I know of about ear witness memory.
Yeah.
And I don't, in courts of law, it's always treated as a kind of poor man's eyewitness testimony, but the fact of the matter is that there's always more ear witnesses than there are eyewitnesses because of the way sound behaves. It leaks, it goes across corners and through windows, and so you're always going to have more ear witnesses. And almost every high-profile trial, if you think about it, over the last even 15 years, has revolved around, in some part, audio evidence. So whether that be Trayvon Martin, right? It was who was screaming.
Interesting.
Right? Which one of the two was screaming? Was it Zimmerman or was it Trayvon Martin? If you look at Oscar Pistorius, right? That was a big one for
whether he shot behind the wall
or it was also did he claim that he only knew it was her after he shot?
Yeah.
So other witnesses claimed they heard something before, arguing, etc., like that. So all of these cases have revolved, have necessitated a kind of exploration into the acoustic memories of witnesses. But the kind of questions they ask are basically eyewitness questions, but they didn't see anything, right? Yeah. So, no one's really elaborating on what it would mean to ask questions that are tailored specifically to acoustic memories rather than just sort of go about it like you would interview any witness. And what we're trying to do,
given your work, that's changing? Is that, or it's still you're so?
We're trying to change it. Yeah, we're trying to change it. We're trying to build a kind of vocabulary and a way of adapting questions and approaching witnesses that is tailored towards a kind of sonic memory and a sonic imagination, and the way that we encode sound, and what I realized, interestingly enough, is that people use sound effects. They often synthesize noises based on other sounds around them. So we're all kind of, memorizing our sonic world by.
And when you're sitting across from these ear witnesses, are you on a synthesizer playing noises, or is it old school like we saw in the old studios where you've got various?
It's laptop. Yeah, it's all digital.
Yeah.
I have libraries. We set levels and tones. So the big thing in Saydnaya is what we realize is the silence itself was a kind of crime, because the silence was brutally enforced. The minute they enter the prison, one, the first thing the guards tell them, or the dhabit, or the, I don't know what you'd call that, tells them is, the main prison guard tells them is, they have to be silent, that they cannot speak. This the rule of Saydnaya, that you don't make a single sound, a cough, anything. You don't move. And even the guards themselves, what we would learn from them is they wore sneakers, not military boots. So the silence there was extreme, and
that's enough to drive a human being absolutely insane.
And imagine, we know, okay, silence by ourselves is one thing. Silence with 40 people in a cell made for 6 is something else. And so we had to understand really what was that level of silence. And so I would set that level by listening to tones, white noises, trying to get them to remember how quiet it was. They all of them spoke about how when they re-emerged, actually they spoke extremely quietly, and how sort of coming back, like you imagine going into a bright room after you've been in the dark, that same effect happening to them. So we try to understand the kind of level of that silence, because anyone who breached that silence was essentially sentenced to death. And so we were trying to establish that it was itself a kind of crime. It was itself a kind of act of torture. It was itself a kind of pressure that was exerted upon those people. So for example, establishing silence. But one of the biggest things we got through that silence was that because they had to know where the guards were at all times, they built acute memories of how the prison functioned and how people moved around there. So the silence was actually the thing that was enable for us to tell it, for example, how many people were inside. So how we could do that was work with them to remember how many locks they remember opening in their wing, and how many prison cells were being used.
And were we able to map the prison as a result of that?
Yeah. We could then know how many cells were in each wing. And they had to know each lock sounding different to the next, because if the guard was, let's say, opening the 3rd door, they had to know he was there, and they could already get in position. They had to assume a position when the guards were close. And the guards would sometimes try to also catch them out. So survival and witnessing there were in the same tier.
Yeah.
To survive Saydnaya was to be its greatest witness. And that really helped us then in 2016 release that report about all, what we learned, what were the crimes that were happening there, and build it into what it became, infamous, and then for the outside world, an icon of its liberation in last December.
And so you're doing very unique work, very important work, very difficult work given the subject matter that you're covering. How do you measure its impact? I mean, you're uncovering the truth is oftentimes reward in and of itself, but then the question is, where does that truth go? And how do you think about that every time you do one of these projects?
I think you've got to have a long view. You've got to have a long view, otherwise you'd go crazy, because you're just seeing crime. Right now we're just seeing crime after crime, and we're seeing how the threshold is just changing. And that's even changing discourse. It's changing the way we're speaking. What we thought was permissible 2 years ago is just simply not anymore. And that's what Ghassan Abu Sitta said, very, very, very eloquently, that if we do not have justice in this war, what will the next one look like? And I don't just mean in Palestine, in anywhere. And so you have to have a long view. And what we see, one way of seeing what I feel that impact happens. Of course, there's the short-term impact, social media. It gets read in Congress. It gets presented to Matthew Miller in the State Department. We get our numbers, put forward there, and that's very, important. You feel you're actually, some work that we've done in our studio in London immediately, gets published and is brought to the highest office. That's one way of measuring the impact. But then we see it played through a kind of set of rhetorical games. What we saw with Hind Rajab is that we were not the first to that case. We were early on. We were asked by Washington Post, and we gave our assessment there. But it was later our much closer and careful work that was outside of the news cycle that took months to look through every one of the gunshots. I mean, there was hours of that recording of Hind on the phone to the Palestinian Red Crescent. Allowed us to give the most comprehensive event about what happened there. And then that story that we could say that the story that now most people know about that case is from our work, that the tank that killed her was 13 to 20 meters away.
Shooting 300 some rounds.
Knowing
that there was only a child in there.
Yeah. I mean, you see, 13 meters, you know exactly what's inside there. If they can target something from 5 kilometers, they know what was there 13 meters away. So that information and the amount of shots, the distance, all of that started to enter a kind of set of arguments, right, that people could make. People like Mehdi Hassan, now when he argues with someone, he uses those numbers, and many more. And so you sort of start to see that you're a part of an ecosystem that builds discourse, from, you keep putting facts into the world, and hopefully they together accumulate, and that's together with other organizations doing the same thing.
So we're in an increasingly in a world, I feel, which is increasingly material and short-term in their view of rewards. What I mean by material, obviously, is the consumer culture continues to grow. If you look at how most people I speak to measure their success, it's purely in financial terms.
Right.
and those tend to be pretty short-term. I feel with every additional generation, the desire to make quick financial gains and then stop increases. So in my generation, most people I knew expected to work all their lives. I speak to people 15, 20 years younger than I am. In most cases, they want to do their quick fix in something, right, and then go off and buy a resort somewhere and hang out in. You're obviously built of different stuff and have different motivations.
Yeah.
I'd love to understand a bit about, in this increasingly material world, what keeps you motivated to do this very long-term work that I imagine is not at all driven financially. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about your motivations.
I mean, I find it very meaningful. We've put something in the world with Earshot, this organization I run, that nobody knew they needed until everybody needed it. And that is enough of in itself to put it dry. When you put something in the world, and you might recognize this from other kind of fields of entrepreneurship, you've created something that suddenly everyone needs. And, maybe there's a financial part of that, maybe there's not. But I think if you'd ask most of those entrepreneurs, the reward would be there, right? Okay, there may be other ways of measuring that reward. But once you've generated something that is so necessary and so useful, in this case, in the pursuit of justice, then that's enough of a drive. And we see now, when any event happens, we just get flooded. Our inbox gets flooded for help. And what we're able to do now is sort of hopefully sidestep that and not work just for the kind of media industrial complex, and work with the most affected parties. So, you ask about success. I mean, some of our really smallest cases, like Zif Zafa, work on noise pollution in the Golan Heights, working with the community there, being able to provide them super high-tech ways of arguing against the construction of wind turbines, right, 30 meters above their heads, was also a big, case for us. So it's not really only the big headline cases. I think it's really also about how you can sort of see an inventive process being used in a kind of broad, being used across many contexts for and really helping people in those places and times. And I think that's enough of a motivation. Of course, we're also, I think, just standing by and seeing this stuff go on would hurt me a lot more than participating in it and
Yeah.
trying to get my hands dirty with it.
And if I may then bridge that to what is your mental state as you're dealing with these topics, many of which are very dark. For example, when you're speaking to people who've been in a prison in absolute darkness, in many cases for years, and tortured regularly, how do you continue on in that process, and how does it affect you as a human being?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, you're also very connected to people who have really borne the brunt of some of those things. So that keeps your feet on the ground. With Saydnaya, I thought I kind of escaped any of the darkness. And it's usually when we publish, when you see the impact, you start to see it circulate. That's when it hits you, when you release it. And I remember I was sitting in Beirut, I was watching Game of Thrones. And I was just like randomly, just chilling out, watching Game of Thrones, nothing to do, on a Sunday. And someone closed the door in the movie. And it was the same stock door closing sound I had used in one of the interviews.
Interesting.
And I heard it, and it just brought me back. And then I was out. So you get hits, you get a surprise hit sometimes. Of course, Hind Rajab was also very difficult for me. I have a 6-year-old daughter. At the time, she was 6. Now she's 7. Her elder cousin is also called Layan. Layan Hamadi was Hind Rajab's older cousin. That was very difficult. And, one of the benefits, but also the difficulties of working in our region is that I speak and understand Arabic.
Yeah.
And so for many other practitioners, that's just, their field of kind of sound investigation stops with the bullet. We hear what people are saying around. We hear the context, and that also can affect you.
It's funny you talked about sound memory, and I was trying to remember if I have instances where recalling a sound impacted me. And so oftentimes I'm surprised at how smell impacts me, where I'll smell a perfume and I'll associate it with a person I haven't seen for decades, and I'd be like, oh, and I'd be able to pick up the phone and call the person and say, did you wear this perfume? And they'd say, yeah, and I'd be, it was crazy. But I was in a compound in Riyadh called Muhayya compound. I had arrived at 11 p.m. and at midnight it got attacked. And the building collapsed on top of us. There was a gun battle that went on for a while. And
this is 89.
This wasn't 89. This was 2003, I believe. But what was interesting is many years later, I was in Jordan in this sort of almost summer period, and I was sitting in an outdoor cafe, and the kids had just gotten their tawjihi results. And initially, when I heard the gunshots go off in Riyadh, I thought it was firecrackers. And for the longest time, I wasn't alarmed until the big explosion happened. But then in Jordan, sitting in an outdoor cafe, tawjihi graduates, I guess, when they get the grades, they shoot bullets in the air. And as soon as I heard that first bullet, I instantaneously wanted to duck under the table. So it's funny how one instance sort of just gets built into your psyche, and then you're just able to react to it so much more quickly. A noise I couldn't recognize before suddenly was very memorable, and I knew what I had to do, which was to hide. And everyone around the table was sort of surprised how quickly I panicked. But I guess you learn quickly. When you think about how someone can support you in what you're doing right now, because you're obviously doing some really important work, and to what extent can listeners or others participate in any way? Is it all driven by large organizations like Amnesty International knocking on your door and saying, this is what we'd like to do, or is there more of a grassroots approach to what you do?
There is, yeah. There could be a way in which we just work for New York Times, anyone who has the resources. What we've seen recently is that I think there's a necessity to be independent.
Yeah.
We've been part of cases where we've produced a massive body of evidence that's extremely significant, and it's been cherry picked. We've been part of cases where, people have been very precious about material and not shared it because that they had this inside scoop, etc. So we realized that if we really want to serve the people that we work for, or that we are actually working for, and also be part of kind of legal campaigns, then we need to be independent, and that comes with its own challenges.
Diversify your financial.
So we have a group of private supporters called the Founders Circle. They're really what keeps us going for this first period of founding Earshot. So we're only really we just entered our second year. But what I always say is that if we still need private donations by our fourth and fifth year, then we need to rethink this model completely. So we think that getting these donations in the first year is what's helping us build our portfolio of cases and showing why we're completely a necessity. We think we've already done that. It's an easy case to make, but who we're making it to and all of those things takes time. So in order to get to those bigger funds that give us our structural stability, we still need the support of individuals. And so, yeah, anyone listening who sees what we do and sees the value of that and sees how inventive it is and how we're doing it
How
from
impactful.
Yeah, and how we're doing it from an Arab perspective.
Yeah.
It makes a difference when you go on something like Sky News and you see Abu Hamdan talking in a very high level about some very technical stuff.
Yeah.
It shows them that we're not just the subjects of our own oppression, but we are also the adjudicators of that, and that we can listen back.
So the work has very important real world impact. Again, solving mysteries that are about justice. You've translated those into art, and as such, you've been called an artist, and you've exhibited in all the places that matter to art, in museums all over the world, in biennials. Tell me a bit about why the translation to art, and tell me about the process of translating to art.
Well, there's only so much you can say in a human rights report or in a forensic report. Often we're meeting people and we're talking with witnesses that opens up from a tiny little sound a whole world. Like you were talking about this moment in Riyadh. A whole story is in that sound, right? In the memory of that sound, in the way it lives on, in the way that sort of shaped both your story, but also the story of everybody else who was in that building and experienced those noises, maybe for the first time.
Just as an aside, I just remembered also one of the people who was in the home with me, speaking of sound, stopped speaking for 30 days after that. Wow. Sort of went mute. So it's interesting the effect of those sounds. He hadn't seen anyone get hurt, but the impact was I guess going silent, but sorry.
Exactly. No, I mean, so exactly that point, right? I mean, a story like that where, we're encountering those things all the time. Where do you tell those stories, right? And so I, as well as producing investigations, make short films, sound installations where you can walk in and kind of from that one little noise that's part of the investigation, open up those whole worlds and really let people in to the investigations. And the reason why we do that is because we're not satisfied at Earshot of being the one-line expert report, as we were for that first Washington Post article on Hind Rajab. what we want to be is something that you can really understand. And what we could do then later with the documentary that was about that case is say our full piece, no, which is that was for Jazeera. It was say that, you know, actually she said, Hind Rajab and her cousin Layan said, the tanks are next to me, they're firing at us. They say it consistently throughout that recording. Okay. But it took months of our work to corroborate her, you know, to turn her not from just a victim that is the, you know, inevitable horrors of war, but actually a witness who was very capable of speaking to her own crime against herself. And it, you know, so it's both a kind of shame that it takes our work to for people to be able to hear her, but also a source of pride. No, so, and even reflecting on that, you know, even reflecting on my state and instead of how we go about listening to those voices, it opens up a world that I think we want to make sure that people understand it in its most comprehensive way. And that's why we use all these different fields. We use museums, we use human rights organizations, we use news organizations, right? We try and get the story told in as many places as possible. And we think we have a very interesting angle, which is sound, in order to do that. Sound, you know, activates memory in all those ways. It activates experience. Yeah.
And art is associated with creativity.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent does bringing these experiences into that world potentially undermine its integrity?
Yeah.
In the sense that it's a storytelling form, and there's the human rights report
Yeah.
you said is very, very dry and perhaps very poor in
yeah, you know, sometimes it's not only that it's dry, you know, sometimes it's also that it's just simply reductive. You know, it reduces people to the sum total of their oppression, you know, and we get to tell a different story in the films we're making. You get to, you know, hear those people differently.
I guess it impacts people emotionally very differently when they do see it in a form of art, when they walk through one of these and
definitely
and get to sense it firsthand and get to hear it, then it's a different world for them.
Yeah, you know, in what sense it undermines what I do, I was worried about that. And I tried to keep the two worlds very separate at some point, you know. And I remember when I had this New Yorker piece about me,
Beautiful piece.
I was trying to keep it two things. No, and I was trying to like look at what she's taking notes on. You know, I was really trying to keep control of it. And then she just merged the worlds in ways that made so much sense to a broad public, I think, that it sort of helped me release, and that's Doreen St. Felix, the writer. It made me relax a lot more and say, you know what, we are inventing something brand new. You know, it's a new field of investigation. It's going to come with totally new ways of disrupting the whole way in which human rights is done in the first place. It's going to need new forums. It's going to need museums. It's going to need whatever it takes. And so we think that actually, instead of it being something that undermines us, if you want to undermine us with that, we brush it off our shoulders, because actually it's part of our strength.
And how do you measure the impact of those exhibits compared to what we talked about earlier, which was the impact of the research itself? So you talked about the short term being things like the social media, the press that covers it, whose desk it lands on. When you set up an art installation, do you sit and watch how people react to it? Or how do you get a feel of how people change or engage with what you've done?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I don't know if there's a direct way of making it. I mean, of course, you can look at awards and things like that, which I've received, but you know, maybe that's also not the best way. But the interest is still there. You know, when I do an exhibit, people want to come. People want to see what's the new thing. What's you know. I think people learn something from our exhibits. And I think people stopped expecting to be able to learn things from art in general. You know, things are very ambiguous, which is also its strength there, but people can come in and really learn. So I think people, that continued interest in what I do, which, you know, leads to more and more kind of commissions for museums and stuff like that. And I think, you know, what happens is that usually the research part has already made its impact in the world, or at least its short-term impact by the time a museum piece comes out. And so it's a way for the story to continue and extend, and the work on those Palestinian teenagers who were killed in 2014 is just now a part of the permanent collection in the Museum of Warsaw, where it was acquired.
Amazing.
And so that story, it just, again, it's about this long term. And if you want those long arcs, you got to work outside of just the circle of media and news. And so those boys, Nadim Nawada and Muhammad Abu Daher, their names are still there in a permanent exhibit in the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. And I see that on Instagram people go and discover it, and of course it means something very different now than what it did in 2014.
And what does an exhibit of yours look like? So if I showed up at the museum, is it a dark room with sounds, or is it a movie with sound? I'd love to understand what I'd be experiencing if I experienced your work.
So,
and is each different than the other two?
Each is very different. So the story of the silence in Saydnaya, it's a very dark room. It's just very quiet. It's just the sound. It's about the level which it's about their whispers. And it's a collection of interviews. It's a sound piece in the dark. That's called The Missing 19 Decibels. That work about the killing of Nadim Nawar and Muhammad Abu Daher, it's a short film called Rubber Coated Steel. And that film becomes part of an installation. So in Warsaw, what you'd see, and I have to say this, that work is also in collection at the Centre Pompidou, and they're also showing it now in Taiwan. They're not showing it in France, they're showing it in Taiwan. But anyway, it's also part of the Tate collection. They have not shown it.
They haven't shown it.
No. In fact, they extended a work of a friend of mine, a beautiful photographer, called Farah Al-Qasimi, who's a Gulf artist, brilliant photographer. But I think now would be the time to show something like that. Anyway, the point is that so there is, of course, suppression of that work in the art world as well. It's not a free space. But when you'd go into an installation, what I've done is, I organized the visualization of those gunshots according to the speed at which they would travel in that room in a split second. So you see that you actually physically, remember that whole work was about the speed of the rubber bullet, the supersonic crack. Yeah. So there's a way where you kind of use the room in which it's exhibited to kind of expand and make really sensible the idea of those different bullet speeds that are happening in split seconds.
What was your journey to moving your first investigation from an investigation into an art installation? Was that at the invitation of someone, or you just woke up one day and thought, this is how this story gets out to the world?
Yeah, like I said, so I did this course that was a joint, BA and BSc. So the idea of always merging art and science was really something that was almost the way to do it, rather than something different. And I also came from music, where, mic placement and effects and all of this stuff does whole kinds of emotions and effects. So you always understand the meaning of the sort of technical work. You understand its meaning, its broader meaning. And I think, so I was always kind of showing, in museums, but the kind of work changed when I started doing more investigative work, Yeah.
And you talked about suppression, obviously your work. I won't say it's controversial, but I'd say it certainly rubs particularly the criminals who are being exposed the wrong way, and they probably will try and suppress you every which way. Do you have any experiences you can cite where that's come home, whether it's been, again, a canceled exhibition or outright threats, or any other way where people have come to you and said, this work has to stop? Whether subtle or not so subtle.
That I can speak about, certainly canceled exhibitions. That's an easy one to speak about.
There have been canceled exhibitions.
They have, yes. with the Museum of Philadelphia, for example.
And
the
did they give a
Museum
good
of-
reason? Was it?
They said the world is such a different place now, Lawrence. So I said, yeah, I'm from that world, the different one. You know, I got to write to them. When they wrote me that it's cancelled, I said I got to sign off best regards from the other side of history, you know, because
Yeah.
it's so obvious that in 10 years, even if 10 years maximum, the most important cultural production will be the work that's about the genocide. And the world will recognize that. So it's just about, again, having a longer game. You know, they can cancel this here, they can do this there. Those are very coward moves, but they're quite pathetic. But what's really important is what's going to happen in the future.
It's amazing how the very basis of Western culture is freedom of speech, and how much that's disappearing in front of our eyes, where people don't want to hear the truth.
I mean, rather than give Palestinians human rights, they just tank the whole of human rights. And that's quite remarkable. Huh? We were the last line, you know. And
it's so.
And I think it's a reckoning. It is precisely this reckoning with what it means, the foundation of those cultures, which is going to have to happen now, and that's why there's such resistance to accept what's going on there.
What's next for you? I mean, it's a beautiful journey. It's so many different. It's the perfect marriage, I would say, of science and art, and both being dedicated to meaning.
Yeah,
because oftentimes people merge these things and with very little useful impact to this world. And in this case, you're serving, I feel, humanity by bringing both. Where does this go?
What we're really interested in is thinking about how we can build bits of technology, that we're not only doing the investigative work, we're also building the tools. And we're having to build our own tools to do the work we're doing because they don't exist. It's not an out-of-the-box field. So we're adapting, we're building our own plugins in Grasshopper, or we're writing code to do work that does pattern recognition, etc. So we're having to build our own tools, and we see that as the next frontier for how we can both get our organization supported and our research supported, and also put something in the world that means that journalists can do a lot of the work that they're asking us to do now, right? Or they'll have at least the know-how and the tools to do that. So so that's what's next. It's really expanding it in terms of kind of building the tech. And that's
I don't want you to disclose anything. Obviously, you're not comfortable exposing, but are you currently working on investigations?
Yes. So when will this come out?
Probably in the next 60 days.
Okay, that's good.
So hopefully, whatever it is.
So we are doing, we're working for the Palestinian Red Crescent on the killing of the 15 medics. We have been able to uncover something about that investigation that shows that basically everyone kind of got it wrong, actually. And it's that the shooters were more or less stationed in one place until the last 9 shots. They were situated on one axis. They were firing. So what the New York Times would tell you is that they're getting closer and closer and closer. They're not. There's a reason for that. We looked at the echoes. The echoes remain the same throughout, for the majority of the time until the end. What we're seeing, they're firing from one position, which is cross-corroborated by one of the witnesses, Munzer, who was there. And they're firing at them from one position. And why the New York Times, with their experts, think that they're moving closer is because, how can I say this in a non-technical way, is basically the changing intervals between the supersonic crack and the muzzle blast of the shots are getting shorter. But they're not getting shorter. They're going all over the place. What we're showing is actually that shows the full range of spread, because that interval can change according to distance. I'm moving closer to something, but it can also change according to trajectory. So the angle of the bullets coming in, and we're able to map the whole trajectory of fire and show that there are more than 725 shots that were fired against those medics.
From a close distance.
From a very close distance. Definitely a visible distance. We're able to model exactly where they were standing, and you'll be able to see in a 3D model what you would have seen from there, let alone someone with all the tech, night vision, etc. But what we also then see is the last 9 shots are very different. We hear the person filming the case, filming the incident, say they're here, they've come, and then we hear the last 9 shots. The last 9 shots are very different in character. The echoes change completely, and we can more or less see that those look like the sort of verified kill shots. Yeah. So those are coming in after they've shot from one position. So that's a whole thing that we're working for the Red Crescent on that, working with their witnesses. That will be a very important case that will again not be the first, but be the hopefully the last word on that, and give them the ability to take that to the highest offices they want. That's really a very clear case of a war crime. And we're also working on a mysterious use of a sonic weapon to attack a silent vigil in Serbia. That was a really interesting case because despite everyone manifesting a silence of 15 minutes, and despite many filmed footage, we don't hear it. There's this very strange incident where we see an crowd move in a very sort of coordinated, very, explicit way. They part and then they stop, they look around them. And we did a series of Earwitness interviews with 15 people who were there and work on 4,000 statements. So there's overwhelming Earwitness testimony that they were subject to some kind of weapon, sonic weapon, but you don't have it on any of the devices.
Crazy.
So we're really deep in trying to figure out, well, how wasn't this recorded, and
what is it? How did it work?
Yeah, and so that's been a really interesting case. Yeah.
Lawrence, I'm very thankful for you.
Thank you so
much. For all
much.
the amazing work that you do, for the impact it does, for sharing some of your stories with me today.
Thank you very much.
I wish you continued success, and I hope you get a lot of support from the listeners.
Yeah, please.
I'm also curious, if I may, just as a parting words, beyond obviously financial support, are you looking for talent to also join you? And what type of talent does Lawrence seek? Because it is a very unique.
Yeah. Our team, it's Fabio Cervi, Adnan Nakvi, and Kelin Matar. So we're just 4 people.
Amazing.
We worked on more than 30. We were cited in more than 30 news articles last year. We worked on over 40 cases. We've submitted evidence in 2 jurisdictions. So in very short time, with a very short team, we've managed to achieve a lot. And that's because the team are little Swiss Army knives. They can do the whole gambit, and they do 3D modeling, they do coding, they do very high-level audio analysis work, and they're able to edit videos and produce comprehensive little clips that allow people into that world and help them understand that what we're doing is legitimate and how we've done it, because we feel that being open source is on both ends. You use evidence from the open source, but also you've got to be open about your methods and have that subject to the critique of your peers. They're doing all of that work. So that's the kind of people we're looking for. People who are really multi-talented, really coming from sound is very important. It's coming from audio engineering, music, but being able to sort of work across the whole field in which they see us participating. And that's so it's a very coming to work for us is it's a very exciting thing, and it involves a lot of training. That's why we grow so slowly. So yeah.
Lawrence, shukran كتير. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.